Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
Welcome to episode 104 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, and to the fourth episode in our Yoga Studio Business mini-series. Today we're talking about the legal aspects of running a yoga business. I know, legal issues and considerations are sometimes the last thing you want to think about as a yoga teacher. Sometimes we can get overwhelmed with the legal terms and rules from state to state or province to province for our Canadian listeners. And that's why I've invited Saerin Ally Cho to answer some of the common questions we all face in our yoga businesses. Thank you to everyone who has emailed, asked in person, or posted legal questions. They are what has inspired this episode. If you've ever struggled with figuring out taxes, or if you've ever wondered about your liability as a yoga instructor, or even if you just need help with the practical aspects of legally establishing and managing your business, this is a must listen. It's already made an impact in my own yoga business. Also, Ally has a really handy checklist, and the link for that will be in our show notes ready for you at theconnectedyogateacher.com/104. It outlines a list of considerations, and after reading it, it is a list I'm going to check back with on a yearly basis in my own business. If you are new here, hi and welcome. My name is Shannon Crow. I'm a mother of three, a yoga teacher, and a trainer and consultant working for yoga teachers. This podcast was created because I, at times, was feeling isolated and sometimes frustrated and disconnected from information, support, and a professional group of yoga teacher peers. This podcast is a place where you can connect to information and inspiration every single week as you navigate the jungles of yoga entrepreneurship. Today's episode has been one that I've been preparing for a while. A lot of you, as I said, have shared legal questions, and I wanted to find someone who really understands the business of teaching yoga as well as law. Saerin Ally Cho is the founder of Love Light Law and is a lawyer who caters to yoga teachers and wellness entrepreneurs. Her mission is to help people do what they love and share their light by protecting their business with the law on their side. So that's where the Love Light Law comes in. Saerin has been practicing yoga since 2004 and teaching yoga since she became a mother. She has trained with some renowned teachers in various yoga teachings and offers alignment-focused yoga instruction in San Diego, California. Over the years, Saerin noticed a severe lack of updated, practical, and useful legal and tax advice available to yoga teachers to help them to run their businesses. So she decided to put her law degrees and years of experience in the legal field to use and focus her energy on serving the community of yoga teachers and business owners. In this episode, Saerin shares her wealth of knowledge on legal and tax issues that we as yoga business owners face and how best to approach these complicated but extremely important topics in our businesses. And before we dive in, I just want to remind you that Saerin is from the United States, so you really want to check in with your country or your state or your province, your location. What are the laws? What are the rules where you live? And at the same time, this just gives us a really good place to start, no matter where we live. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. Ally, it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Tell our listeners your full name. That would help me a lot.
My name is Saerin Ally Cho.
Okay, so me calling you Ally, is that what you often go by, or do you go by Saerin Ally?
I go by both. I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to stick to sort of the given name for my professional purposes. And Saerin is my given name, which I still adore. And then Ally's the name that I do use for teaching yoga.
Okay.
So we can go by Ally today.
Either way, we can do both. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with our yoga teachers. We've had a lot of questions in the Connected Yoga Teacher group about legal questions and accounting questions and insurance questions. And I feel like a lot of the time then I'll tag you in on those because you are a lawyer and a yoga teacher. Do you want to tell us what came first in that journey?
Sure. attorney is what came first. I have a JD from University of San Diego, and then I also have an LLM in taxation. So I have a tax specialty as well. Secondly, motherhood came, and then that led me into a third yoga teacher.
Oh, wow. Tell us why motherhood led you into the third, being a yoga teacher.
After my daughter was born, I had a tough postpartum recovery with an unplanned cesarean. So this is a whole other podcast. So I won't get into details, but I really felt that when the dust settled, there was no slice of a pie that was left for me. There was family, there was work, there was my daughter, there was everything and everyone else but myself. So I took a good look at what I enjoyed doing before I became a mother and decided to dive deep into that, and that was yoga. So I took a regular training and then connected with prenatal out of all the topics, and then went right away onto prenatal yoga teacher training and became prenatal yoga teacher after that.
Nice. This is, as you know, is a specialty that's really close to my heart, but I love that we're chatting today because I am getting an episode ready all about baby and me. And I've just been writing about what I felt like as a new mom. It wasn't pretty. It was really tough.
Right.
So I appreciate you saying that then that's what led you to yoga and to share that. So hats off to you for doing that. And then also to our listeners who are also doing the same, like really helping the new parents out there. Not the easiest job.
Thank you.
Let's get into some of the legal questions. And I feel like one question that comes up a lot in our group is, should I have an LLC? And I honestly barely know how to even ask the question here to you because I don't know about this at all. So I'm excited to hear this myself.
All right. So stop me if I get too detailed. We're going to think that when you are coming into a business, and yoga is definitely a business, even if you're teaching part-time or full-time, you're going to think about what is the right legal entity structure that fits for me, or business structure. And everyone just says LLC, and that is not an interchangeable word, right? It's one of the many examples that you can use. First of all, I want to say LLC stands for a limited liability company, and that concept exists actually throughout the world. But since I'm a U.S. Attorney, I will say that in the U.S. it's a state concept, and each state, the requirements are different. But in general, I'll take a step back and say that legal entity structure in general creates a wall between your personal assets and liabilities on one side and professional assets and liabilities on the other. So if you are starting out as a yoga teacher and you don't have a lot of business assets, right? You don't have a lot of income, you don't really have a lot of liability either as a yoga teacher, unless you have specific fact, you're working with a very special population, whatnot. My advice in general would be hold off, wait until yoga becomes a certain level of a business income for you, or maybe it becomes your full-time job eventually. You don't know when you're starting out what that journey is going to look like. So LLC is an example, and people talk about S Corp or C Corp or B Corp. There are many different types of partnerships, limited partnerships. And so I would say in just general, take a deep breath. Chances are a lot of the yoga teachers who are teaching with a very limited population or limited schedule might not need anything. But as you go into teaching a little bit longer, you might have, in your audience, Shannon, you might have people who've been teaching for a long time and have an extensive teaching portfolio. In that case, that might be recommended. And what's recommended is really dependent on who you are, where you are, what your income is, what your assets and liabilities are on the professional and the personal side. So a lot of things go into it. People are like, oh, just set it up, it's $100. Not true. It depends on where you are. In California, it's not $100 to set up. And something people don't think about is, what is it going to take to maintain it? You don't just set up an LLC or a legal entity and walk away. They're an ongoing responsibility. And if you want to get rid of it, you might have to dissolve it as well. And so it's a bigger consideration than people realize. So for this purpose, I'll just say it really depends on a lot of different facts. If you're just starting out, don't worry about it yet. And if you really see your business taking off, and if you have, a lot of personal assets that you are wanting to protect, a home, a lot of children, that might drive someone to recommend that you have an entity that's appropriate for you. Hopefully that wasn't too much.
It wasn't. It's bringing to mind when I worked at a large animal vet clinic, we had a limited company. Is this kind of the same thing? Like at the end of our name?
I would think so.
It was a numbered company or something. And I do know that there were certain benefits, and it was really tied in with our accountant and the benefits that we get back. But it also cost a lot more to do the accounting, and it took more time. It was its whole other thing.
Right. And again, it will depend, right? In the United States, if you are one person setting up an LLC and you own the whole thing, so you're a single member LLC, then for federal tax purposes, it's treated as sort of an extension of you. So the income and loss or profits and losses will be reported on Schedule C of your tax return 1040. But then at the state level, how it gets treated may be a little bit different. It also depends on if you're in the community property state. So there are a lot of different things. And I don't want to crowd your audience. So I'll just say, it's the same thing. Think simple, get started, see where it takes you, and then approach a counsel or someone in your jurisdiction that can advise you intelligently and specific to your situation.
Okay. This is really helpful. You can tell me if it's the same in the US or where you are in the US, and I'm in Canada, so I can kind of share what it's like. I'm a sole proprietor, so my business name is just my name. It's Shannon Crow is sort of my legal business name, I would say. Like that's what I file my taxes under. I don't have an LLC. I've been teaching for 13 years. I have a smaller teaching schedule. So first of all, is it the same where you are, that you can just have your business as your name?
Thank you for asking that question. I'm sure that's the question on many people's minds. So once you start engaging in a business, and I say that because some people consider teaching as a hobby. I don't think it's a hobby, but for tax purposes, there is a clear distinction between a hobby and a business. And for you to have a business at the foundation level, what is required is your intent to make it a profitable business. So even if you're losing for the first, few years because you're getting set up and you are taking on additional training or you're buying tools and whatnot, you can still be engaged in a business for, tax and legal purposes and claim those deductions. So when you go into a business for yourself, you are by default a sole proprietor. And that is the same in Canada and the United States, it sounds like, based on what you're telling me. And then if you create LLC, the plain vanilla as a single person, then it just creates, I'll just say, a slight wall between your personal assets and liabilities and business assets and liabilities. How it gets, for at least in the United States, how it gets reported on the tax return would be the same, whether you're a sole proprietor or you have an LLC as a single member.
Is there some magic formula? Is it like if you're making this amount of money, or if you have like more than these many numbers of assets, like what do you determine if someone came to you personally and they were asking you if they should have an LLC? Do you kind of have like a little checklist where you're like, oh, yep.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Again, it's going to depend on the person and your own risk tolerance level. For me, I ask about your life. Do you have a house that you own or do you rent? Do you have children? How many do you have? What does your spouse do? And what does that sort of economic situation look like? I might even ask about your future earning potential. And then maybe what you're used to making if you are making a transition from one career to the other. In general, LLC, it's up to you. Financially, I'm not going to draw a dollar value. It's really up to you to see what would make sense to draw that wall. So I was talking to someone who was, early in her early 20s. She was renting, not married, no kids, just starting out as a yoga teacher. She was in a different career for about a few years, but all she literally had was debt, car loans and student loans. And so on the personal and the business side, she didn't have a lot of assets to protect, right? And so I told her, why don't you get started and see where this takes you? And then once you have something that motivates you to create that wall, if you want to, we can talk about it then. I won't even chart. I mean, that's just basic. But I think as we get older, things get a little bit more complicated, right? I don't know too much about you, Shannon, but you are grown up. You're not 20-something, right? With 3 grown children, or at least one or more in teenage years. And I'm sure you own your home. I know your husband is also a yoga teacher. And you have a very successful yoga business as well. So now you might be thinking, oh, no, I have to set up something. Not necessarily, what population are you dealing with and how are you mitigating any risks? And are they informed? Do you have good, solid contracts? Do you have waivers and release of liability forms? And do you trust and have a really good relationship with the studio that you work at and the students you work with? And so you can see how it's a buffet of facts that could really impact your decision. And so for me, if somebody came to me, I'd get to know you and then see what decision would make sense for you. And ultimately that would be your decision. But if it's a matter of, $100 and with not a lot of negative impact, then we can, it depends on where you are. Maybe it's worthwhile for you.
Right. You're making me think that maybe I should talk to a lawyer. Okay. So the next most common question that I hear from yoga teachers is first of all, I think just working with teachers who are wanting to name their business something. So some people choose to have their name. Like I think of my website for my yoga is shannoncrow.com. But the website for the podcast is theconnectedyogateacher.com. So often people say can I just have this business name? What if someone else has the same thing? What if someone tries to take my business name? So can you tell us any tips or tricks with that?
Sure. So as a sole proprietor, you're not setting up anything. You're by default sole proprietor until you set up something, and you can register a business name. And depending on where it's called something else everywhere. And sometimes it's called DBA, doing business as, or a fictitious business name, at least in San Diego, California, where I'm located. And so I know this goes into somewhat of a business, branding, social media, web presence, so beyond legal. So I'll try to comment on the legal side. If you are worried about taking someone's name, you can just simply do a quick search online. You can start in the United States, U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and there's Trademark Electronic Search System test. And you could just see what's registered for trademark purposes. But a lot of times you don't even need to go there. There's a website that I learned about. It's namecheck.com.
Namecheck?
Yeah. NAMECHK.com. And you just put in the name that you think you want, and then it'll do a search on Google, Facebook, Instagram to see what's available still. And so that can help you decide what your business name could be starting out. And I would say, and some people asked me, should I trademark it right away? No, hold off. You don't have to trademark anything. If it includes your name, it doesn't need Shannon Crow Yoga, fine. If you want to eventually trademark Connected Yoga Teacher, you can consider, but I don't think you really need to go that far. And I think at the end of the day, it's also, again, fact-specific business decision for you. But, when I Google Connected Yoga Teacher, there's no doubt that's you. And you have a presence on Facebook, Instagram, and your podcast. And so if there's a reason to worry or be concerned, then you can. But so you're not selling necessarily, products. It's very personal and web-based, and also it's you that created the yoga, Connected Yoga Teacher. And I think that's very clear based on what I know about your business. I wouldn't really be concerned.
What if someone else was like, well, I'm going to trademark it and take it? Can they?
They can if they wanted to. I actually don't know if in Canada, if it's registration first or usage first, but you do have common law trademark, at least in the United States, because you've been using it for longer.
Okay.
So people don't want to fight and litigate, but it can get messy. But a lot of times, unless you have a mega million, core power yoga business, I don't think that's something that most people need to really worry about.
Okay. Is there anything else about naming that you think comes up in the legal side of things? Well, one thing in the yoga world is that we know that some people have tried to trademark different movements or
poses, sequence.
Yeah, yoga sequence. I've been reading a little bit more. Some yoga teachers are saying, okay, I learned this practice, this movement practice, but then I've taken it and I've made it my own in my own way. Anything in terms of I guess that gets more into the content that we share.
Yeah, there would be a little bit more copyright. And as far as I know, sequence of movements are not qualified to be copyrighted.
Right. Okay.
And we'll leave it there.
Okay. Now I'm looking over this really handy list, and I want to tell our Connected Yoga Teacher listeners that we will make sure to link to this. It's a resource that you've put together, and this is just sort of the beginning of that resource. So we'll definitely link to it. And I'm looking at number 3 here, and I don't even understand. So you're going to have to explain it to me. Obtain an EIN from the IRS for free. That I'm just like, what is that?
So I'm sorry, guys, because I know you have a global audience. This is specific to the United States. EIN stands for Employer Identification Number. And it's just one way to, and you can get it for free from the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, the federal tax agency in the United States. And you don't have to get it. And you don't have to have an LLC or any legal entity to get it, but it's available to you for free if you want it. And I would recommend it for teachers that are teaching in many different places and are widely sharing their social security number everywhere, right? So for your own protection, instead of using your social security number, you can use your EIN as your business number, basically. And this, if you have a legal entity, then the legal entity would have its own number. But if you have a single member LLC, you can use your EIN instead of a social security number. You can use a social security number too, but it's for your own safety and security. It's something that I would recommend in the United States.
So this is good to know that this kind of works as a protection, that we could apply for that business number and use that instead. Hi, Connected Yoga Teachers. Just popping in here for a moment to translate for our Canadian listeners. Ally talks about social security number, and in Canada, this is called a social insurance number. Also, she talked about obtaining an EIN, which I don't know an equivalent of in Canada. I got a little confused at this point while we were chatting. I was wondering if we have an equivalent that would be like a business number here, but the way she explained it makes me think that this is different. If there are any listeners out there who know Canadian law with regards to a business, I would love to hear anything that you would add to this. And here's something I didn't know specific to our US teachers.
In the United States too, if I'm getting paid, I work for a yoga studio, I would need to provide social security number, but I could choose to give my EIN if that's how I'm setting myself up as.
You're making me think of another question, because you said if you're working in a studio, you need to supply your social security number. Is that only if you're an employee, or does that still apply if you are a contract worker?
Absolutely. You need to have some sort of identification number that you provide to the studio or any place of work that you're working, regardless of your employment classification, whether you're an employee or an independent contractor. So if you are an employee, chances are you're an employee as an individual, then you would have to provide a social security number.
So let's look at the next one, getting legit with required licenses and permits. So do you want to talk to us about that?
Sure. So depending on where you are, there may be business license requirements or permits or certificates. Each place calls it something different, and that's what makes it really difficult. And each country or the county or the state or a locality might call it different and have a different requirement. Chances are, though, in yoga teaching, it's not really an industry-specific requirement, but so for example, in San Diego, to have a business of any sort, you need a business license. And it's a very nominal fee annually. I think it was maybe $50 or $100. And so it really depends on where you are, what else you're doing too. So if you're, sort of a typical, I don't know if the typical is the right word, yoga teacher, teaching in studios, maybe teaching some workshops and maybe even retreats, then you can just simply search, endorse Google here, business license and your jurisdiction and see what pops up. At least in the United States, you can go to the state official website or even the Small Business Administration website and find out what's required.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah. If you're teaching at a specific location, sometimes that might require. So I had a client who taught this amazing moon yoga. So I think it was full moon yoga. And at that beach, to teach in that area, you have to have a specific permit. And so it's very specific to that jurisdiction. And so it depends on the government and the local offices.
Right.
Google might be the best resource now, or a local business office, not me.
Yeah. So this reminds me of one other thing here is some teachers will say in Canada, like, can I teach this yoga at a park? And they need to check with the county or the town or whoever it is to see if they can legally collect money and teach in a public space. So that could go in that permit.
Yeah.
I know some people also need to have a special, to check into what they need if they're going to teach in their home and have a home-based business as well.
Right.
Is that the same sort of thing?
Exactly. That's a whole category. I mean, obviously, it's a really large category of permits and licenses and registrations and certificates, and it takes some ownership and empowerment on the part of the yoga teacher to just Google and research and see what's required, or maybe just visiting the local offices and say, hey, I'm a yoga teacher in town. I'm going to start teaching here and there. What do I need? You can go to the local county office or the city office and whatnot. And so, for instance, I was considering teaching at the local park here, and I thought, well, I could just start teaching. Who's going to say anything? Right. So maybe it's 2 people, 1 person. It might not matter, but once you start growing your class, that might be a different story. And so when I went to consult at the office, she said, well, if you don't have a huge following, she told me to just start teaching and see where it goes. And then you will need a permit, like an event permit, if you have 50 or more people. But up to 49, you don't need an event permit. But if you think that you're going to teach on a regular basis, once a week, twice a week, whatever, then you might need a business license to teach here. And it's quarterly, something very nominal, so that I'm a known party at that park. So it just takes thoughtfulness and a little bit of research on the part of the yoga teacher to see what's required. But I would also say that if you're just starting out and you have one-on-one private, or you're just working with one person or a few students, I wouldn't let the logistics hold you back and scare you. Right. And I want to drill that here as a lawyer. Yes, there's black and white. Sometimes a lot of things fall into the spectrum of gray. So there is a lot of you should, right? And there's a lot of shoulds in yoga too. Maybe it should look like this, or you should be, 90 degrees this way, or but don't let the should hold you back. It's good to know, good to stay informed. And this is, you have a great venue for yoga teachers to stay informed just enough to know what do I need to look for a little bit more at the next level. And then see when that point is when you need to drill into a particular area. So trademark, license, and permits. Do the bare minimum and see where it takes you first.
Right. Yeah. Okay, this is great. What I wanted to then ask you about, and I know this is more so in the States, I just talked to a Canadian insurance company about hands-on assists and if they are okay to do within Canada because they can't speak outside of Canada. And they were like, yes, for sure. If it's in your training and you're trained to do hands-on assists, then that's fine. And I know talking to US teachers, it's different there and it's different in every state. Do you have anything to add to that? Like, do you know anything where people could check if they can give hands-on assists?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I did learn in your group that certain states would prohibit, and I was very shocked to hear that in the United States, at least in California, it's not forbidden. But I would refer to your episode actually, because I found it to be really helpful in number one, checking in with yourself to see what's comfortable for you. And then also checking with the studio and the students as well. Not necessarily in that order, but
Right.
I don't know that there is a good resource somewhere for yoga teachers to go to see what is legally permitted or not in terms of hands-on assist. That would be a really interesting resource to have, and I'll
Yeah.
write that down.
Yeah, it's not something I've heard of. And then someone had posted in our group that some teachers are in those states, but they have found loopholes so that they can offer assist. So I don't know what those loopholes are, and I don't really know a lot about it, but I think this goes into this category of like, find out first, just ask and find out what's allowed in your
Right.
state or your area in terms of that. One of our teachers asked a great question in the group. She asked, what if we cue something safely? Like, say we cue, everyone come into this, but if you have these concerns, then don't. And then that student just pops into it anyway. And you think, oh my gosh, they shouldn't be doing that. Like, they told me they have neck stuff going on, and now they're just doing this other thing I didn't cue. Who's responsible there for that?
For that set of facts, I would say students, because the student disregarded the teacher's instructions for modification. And he or she was very specific. If you have this, do that, or don't do this. And I think, we talk about in terms of, again, it's very fact specific, but, it's difference between a regular negligence and gross negligence. And so in that set of facts, the teacher asked about any specific medical condition or any limitation, and the student answered and provided the information. And the teacher also specifically gave instructions for modification, which is fantastic. And the student disregarded that, and that's up to the student.
Okay. And so can you give us an example of gross negligence where the teacher would be the one that's responsible?
It's very dependent on sort of what all the things led up to the point. But one ridiculous example or a really clear one would be whether the teacher asked or not, the teacher knows that the student has had recent dramatic injury or surgery to a particular body part. So let's say a shoulder injury and shoulder surgery, and then the teacher puts all the students in shoulder stand and there is no modification. The teacher sees the student trying to get into it and doesn't comment, doesn't do anything. I'm not sure if that would be intentional disregard, but that would be very, very close to it, if not it. That would be pretty gross negligence here. You'll have the knowledge of the student's injury and current struggles. And I understand that sometimes you can't sequence out what you've already planned. Maybe you built the sequence towards the shoulder stand. But hopefully this teacher has done the homework to know that there are other inversions that the teacher can offer instead of the shoulder stand, so you can get the similar benefits of the inversion. So in that case, I would say it's pretty negligent here.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. And so this brings a whole other question in. I've had yoga teachers commenting I'm not sure if it's in our group, but I've seen them commenting like, I never have a waiver form, so I'm never negligent because I don't know what's going on with that student. And I have to say that I disagree. I know that I've checked with my Canadian insurance company and they also disagree. They're like, as much information as you can know as possible on your waiver and intake form is better. Any thoughts on that? Is it different in the US? Is it different from state to state?
This would be a general U.S. legal concept, so it would be different. And let me answer in two parts. First part, so when you ask, or you didn't ask, but you learn about the student's specific condition, and or you have special license or training or certificate, which puts you at a higher level of an expert. Maybe you're a yoga therapist as defined by the Yoga Alliance. So there are different ways to get into that. Once you are at that threshold, your standard of care or the duty of standard of care increases because of that fact or a set of facts. So a yoga teacher coming out of a yoga teacher training 200 might not have legally the same level of standard, duty of care as the same as someone who's been teaching for 20 years and is a yoga therapist.
Okay.
When you look at it from a legal standpoint, you look at all the facts. Who are these people and what should they have known? When you do ask about medical condition, legally speaking, yes, it does increase your standard of care that you should provide because now you have the knowledge of that student's limitation, physical condition or injury or surgery or whatnot. But so that's the first part. I don't mean to scare you. And the second part is you would mitigate any sort of burden or responsibility from that by one, continuing to offer modifications. So that requires homework on the yoga teacher to know what to modify and how to offer that and have the props available and not. And then second, use the language that empowers the student to continue to listen to his or her body and to be present and to modify. I always say it's an invitation, not a competition. And so, yes, I know about these women who are pregnant and they might have wrist issue or their hip is not feeling well or whatnot. I will do my best to offer various modifications in every single posture that we get into, but we also share the language of listen to your body. You're the best teacher. I'm here to guide and to provide as safe of a space as I can, but you need to start listening to your body now and it'll serve you for the rest of the pregnancy, the childbirth, and the recovery after. And so that sort of language, it's not just loving and warm. As a yoga teacher, legally, it also puts the responsibility on the students to listen to their body.
Right. Oh, this is a really good reminder that verbally we can be giving that reminder to students. I have something on my waiver form as well. I'd love for you to look at the waiver form because we have a free template for yoga teachers. So it'd be fun if you read it over and you're like, this is great or this isn't. This is something different. So I feel like we just touched on your list. I know that you have a full list of 12 things, and I'm excited that our listeners will get to download that and check it over. I know that you say that it's a checklist when you start off, but honestly, just going through these first 4 and digging into them and then me asking you questions, it's for any stage of teacher, is just to think.
Right.
I think it says right at the beginning of your thing, do you have all your ducks in a row? So it's a good way to do that.
And I'll say that it's not necessarily a requirement that you have to do all of them. What I would recommend that is that each teacher considers each category of this because it may impact you differently. And throughout your teaching career, depending on what else is going on and your offering and yourself, the importance of one over the other may change and shift. So it's just considerations to be made. Maybe you decide, okay, I thought about the business structure. I do not need one right now. Let's check in about a year. And so I think about it as a wellness checklist for your legal side of your yoga business.
So maybe we even look at this every, year or every couple of years as well. I like this. And I think that we're so quick to kind of put our head in the sand and just think, well, I'm just a yoga teacher. Like, why do I have to think of all these business, accounting, insurance, and legal issues? But I think it's so important. It can really help us. And it can help us also to feel like we're a professional. We have the mindset, we have the education. And I'm so excited that you're taking this work on because I feel like I don't know a lot of people doing that in the yoga world. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Let me know if you find anyone else, especially in Canada or in other countries. I'd love to connect and share ideas and topics, and because I really haven't seen anyone in this arena. I know yoga teachers who are lawyers and who were lawyers, but not necessarily combining the two. And this is the space that I like serving, and I think there is a huge need for it.
Yeah, there is. There is for sure. So if people want to connect with you further, if they download the list and then they have more questions, how can they do that? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
I have a website called lovelightlaw.com, and you can email me, and all the information would be there as well.
Okay.
So that you do what you love and you share your light, and the law can be right after that. I can help you on that side.
I love it. I love that it's all connected as well. I'll make sure to put a note with that in the show notes, as well as a link where they can sign up and get the list of 12 things, because I'm looking further down the list and there's stuff about separating your business money from your personal money.
Oh, yes.
Contracts. I feel like we could go on, but people can download it and then read along. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, connected yoga teachers, I want to hear from you. What was your key takeaway from today's episode? What did you feel like you could take now that you've learned, or maybe a question that came up and you can look into something or take action this week in your own yoga business? Thank you so much for this, Saerin. It actually made me take a look at my own business, and I feel like the checklist that you've given us, thank you so much again for that gift. I feel like it's a great checklist to go over on an annual basis, to come back to these questions and to come back to our own business. So it helped me to decide that, yes, I want to look into what it's like to register my business in Ontario. And I did that with a few clicks online. It was so simple to do that. I would also love to hear from our listeners. What other legal questions do you have? For sure, share them in the comments section of the show notes. It's theconnectedyogateacher.com/104. Also, another key takeaway for me was to find someone like Saerin in Canada who works at serving yoga teachers and wellness providers. So if that is you, please leave a comment in the show notes. And if you work in another location in this field, there aren't very many of you. It's very niche down. And so I'd love to hear from you in the comments of our show notes page. If you are a regular listener, you might have noticed that I shifted things around a little bit in this episode. I'm doing our shout out to our podcast sponsor and to a review giver here in the end of the episode, and that's thanks to Ally. So Ally left us a 4-star review, and it reads, "This is definitely one of the better resource podcasts and groups for yoga teachers out there. The only one thing I find frustrating is the amount of talking, summarization that happens at the beginning of the show. Why not just dive right into the topic? It's not a podcast I can just press play and listen. I find myself skipping and navigating ads. Otherwise, a good quality show. So thank you for creating it. Maybe just make it more casual, listener friendly." I really appreciate this feedback, Ally. And I wonder, I'd love to hear from other listeners if you have other feedback about the podcast. I can take it, and it makes the show better. So I thought, why don't we try and switch things around for this episode? So Ally, you might want to stop listening right now. I tried to dive in as quickly as I could, introduce our guest, and I've left the extras until the end today. And if you're still here, still listening, I have more to share with you. I'm super excited that we are having an in-person gathering. It's happening in Toronto at the same time as the yoga show, and I would love to see you there in person. It's a private gathering just for our connected yoga teacher group, and you are welcome to attend. It's happening Friday, March 29th, and you can find out more about this on our website and also in our Facebook group. Speaking of our sponsor, Schedulicity, many of you know that this is my favorite online software for scheduling. Yoga classes, podcasts, calls, consultation calls, this is the tool that I use. And every week, they make us a customized hot tip to share on the podcast. So let's hear from Michaela over at Schedulicity.
Hello, connected yoga teachers. This is Michaela with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. Schedulicity is an amazing accounting tool. Your dashboard shows your weekly estimated revenue, the number of bookings you have, and the average revenue per booking. Enabling the payment add-on makes things even easier. Once you're connected to Stripe or Square, all your transactions will be listed on your payment screen, and you can select a date range, search by tender type or confirmation number, and export that information to an Excel document. With your schedule and your money this organized, you might have time to tackle something even tougher, like that weird junk drawer or your kid's closet.
Thank you so much, Michaela and Team Schedulicity. I have to share that I'm really excited with the options that I get to choose from with regards to bookings, refunds, payments, and cancellations with Schedulicity, now that I have figured those all out. This really helps me. It helps me to figure out what would I do if someone cancels? What is my refund policy? And this is all set up in the software. Next week on the podcast, we are going to wrap up our yoga studio business mini-series with an episode all about insurance for yoga teachers. If you want to meet up in person, I lead 2 teacher trainings at this time. Mama Nurture Prenatal Yoga Teacher Training. I'm doing that both in Bermuda and also in Meaford, Ontario. And the other training I lead is Yoga for Pelvic Health. I lead that both online and in Meaford, Ontario. To find out more about both of those, go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and look under training and events. Okay, connected yoga teachers, it's time for me to sign off and get outside for a walk in the cold and snow before it gets dark. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to self, to your practice, to your community, so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?